Red dust clung to the sweat dripping down Elena's face as she watched the dirt road cutting through the ranch. At 32, her green eyes still held the spark of someone who didn't give up easily, but her calloused hands told a different story. 3 years had passed since she took over Santa Rita Ranch alone after her father's death, and every day was a battle against the drought, the debt, and the crushing silence. The phone rang for the 5th time that morning. Elena didn't even need to look to know who it was. The bank. It was always the bank. She let it go to voicemail, wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, and went back to fixing the fence the cattle had knocked down the night before. The barbed wire cut her skin, drawing blood, but she barely felt it anymore. Or maybe she just pretended not to. That was when she heard the engine, a high-end luxury car, the kind you hadn't seen around here since the town of Three Pines had lost its status as a major coffee hub. The vehicle pulled up a few yards away, kicking up a cloud of dust that made Elena cough. The door opened, and a tall man stepped out, wearing a navy blue suit that was completely ridiculous for that hellish heat. Sunglasses, slicked back hair, leather briefcase in hand. "I'm looking for Elena Carter," he said, taking off his glasses to reveal brown eyes that studied her with intense interest. "You found her," she replied, not letting go of her pliers. "If you're from the bank, you can turn around. I don't have the money yet, but I will. I'm not with the bank. I'm Robert Miller, an attorney. I'm here to discuss a private matter." Elena finally stopped what she was doing and looked him in the eye. "Private? There's nothing private left here, mister. Everything I own is either collateral or about to be seized." Robert gave a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "That is exactly why I'm here. My client is interested in acquiring your property." Elena's laugh was dry and hollow. "Buy it. This place isn't worth half of what I owe. Who would be crazy enough? Someone who sees potential where others see ruin. He's offering $4 million. Cash." The world stopped. The buzzing of the insects, the hot wind, even time itself seemed to freeze in that moment. Elena felt her legs go weak and leaned against the fence for support. $4 million. It was more than enough to pay off every debt, start over, maybe even move to Chicago and finish the veterinary degree she had abandoned. "Who is your client?" she asked, her voice trembling. "He prefers to remain anonymous for now, but I can assure you he is a serious individual with significant resources and genuine interest. Nobody offers a fortune for a broken ranch without wanting something more. What does he really want?" Robert opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope. "Here is the contract. Read it over carefully. My client will be in town tomorrow and would like an answer by then." Elena took the envelope with shaking hands. "And if I refuse? That's your choice. But I should warn you that the bank is set to foreclose in 2 weeks. So in reality, you don't have much time to choose." He put his sunglasses back on, got into the car, and drove away, leaving Elena alone with the envelope and a whirlwind of thoughts. She looked at the house where she was born, the barn her father had built with his own hands, the land she knew every inch of. Selling it felt like a betrayal, but losing it all felt even worse. That night, Elena could barely sleep. She read the contract dozens of times, looking for traps, hidden clauses, anything that justified such an absurd offer. But it was all standard, too clean actually, and that bothered her. The next morning, she put on her best clothes, jeans without patches and a white shirt she saved for special occasions. She drove into town in her old pickup truck, which spat smoke at every turn. The lawyer had arranged to meet at the only hotel in Three Pines, a 2-story building that had once been elegant back in the 70s. Robert was waiting in the lobby, but he wasn't alone. Beside him sat a man who made Elena's heart race and her blood run cold at the same time. Graying hair at the temples, piercing blue eyes, an aristocratic bearing even in casual clothes. She knew him. Everyone who grew up in Three Pines knew him. Edward Sterling, the man who had destroyed her family. "You," Elena whispered, feeling rage, "rise like lava." "You're the buyer?" Edward stood up, extending a hand that she completely ignored. Elena, it's been so many years. I hope we can speak like adults. Like adults? She repeated, her voice rising. You cheated my father, stole our family's land, destroyed half this town with your empty promises, and now you want me to be polite? I didn't steal anything. I made deals. Your father made poor choices. My father trusted you, and you betrayed him. Robert tried to intervene. Everyone. Perhaps it's best if we sit down and talk calmly. But Elena was already turning, her back. There is no talk. You can rip up that contract. I'd rather lose everything to the bank than give a single cent of satisfaction to this man. Elena, wait, Edward called out, his voice finally losing its coldness. I need this land, and you need this money. We can help each other. She stopped at the door without turning around. There is nothing you can offer me that I would ever want to accept. What if I told you it wasn't my fault? That I was also deceived back then? Now Elena turned, her eyes flashing with fury. 20 years. 20 years and you come to me with that story. My father spent the last years of his life working as a caretaker just to support us. He died tired, broken, and humiliated. And you want me to believe you were a victim? Your father deserved better. I agree. But the past cannot be changed. The future still can. Elena felt a pressure in her chest. Part of her wanted to run out of there and never look back. But the rational part, the part that saw the bills piling up and the days slipping away, kept her rooted to the spot. Why this ranch? She asked, her voice lower now. Why Santa Rita specifically? Edward exchanged a quick look with Robert before answering. Because it's the last piece of the puzzle. I've bought all the surrounding properties over the last few years. Yours is the only one that completes the land needed for the project. What project? A resort. Eco-friendly, sustainable. It will bring jobs, tourism, and development back to Three Pines. The town is dying, Elena. You know that. And it will put more money in your pocket, she added bitterly. That too. I won't lie, but everyone wins. Including you. Elena looked out the hotel window. From there, she could see the town square, nearly empty in the middle of the afternoon. The shops had faded signs, the sidewalks were cracked, and the few residents moved with the slow steps of people who had nowhere to go. Edward was right. Three Pines was dying, and she was dying right along with it. I need time, she said finally. You have until noon tomorrow. After that, I'll look for other alternatives. What other alternatives? It's the last piece. You said so yourself. Edward gave a smile that held no warmth. There are always alternatives, Elena. Some more unpleasant than others. The veiled threat hung in the air like toxic smoke. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. This man wasn't just a ruthless businessman. There was something else. Something dangerous behind that polished facade. I'll think about it, she said, leaving before her voice could fail her. Back at the ranch, Elena sat on the porch, the same spot where her father used to sit to smoke his pipe and tell stories. The afternoon shadows lengthened, painting everything in shades of orange and red. She closed her eyes and tried to hear his voice, asking for advice, for guidance. But there was only silence. That was when she heard the sound of another vehicle approaching. This time, it was a motorcycle, old and loud. The rider took off his helmet, and Elena recognized him immediately. Luke Foster, her childhood friend, now the town's veterinarian. Heard you had a distinguished visitor today, he said, walking up the porch steps. News travels fast around here. Edward Sterling doesn't go unnoticed. Did he make an offer? Elena nodded, unable to speak. Luke sat down beside her. And you're thinking about taking it. I don't have a choice, Luke. It's this or lose everything. There's always a choice. The question is what price you're willing to pay. She looked at her friend, seeing the genuine concern in his eyes. What if I told you I can't take it anymore? That I'm tired of fighting alone? Then I'd tell you that you aren't alone. You never were. Something in his tone made Elena look closer. Luke looked away, his cheeks flushing slightly under his tanned skin. Luke, I can't drag you down into this hole with me. Who said anything about being dragged? Maybe I want to be here. Before Elena could respond, her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered hesitantly. Ms. Carter? A young woman's voice. My name is Julia. I work for Mr. Edward Sterling. He asked me to call and inform you that there was an error in the contract. What kind of error? The amount is wrong. The offer is actually for $6 million, not 4. My boss apologizes for the oversight. Elena almost dropped the phone. 6 million? That's correct. And he would like to add that, should you accept, you may continue living on the property for as long as you wish. It would just be an additional clause. Why is he doing this? There was a pause on the other end. I think it's best if you ask him that in person. The call ended, leaving Elena more confused than ever. Luke watched her with curiosity. What was that? He increased the offer, and he said, I can keep living here. That makes no sense. Why would someone pay more and still let you stay? Exactly. Elena stood up, starting to pace back and forth. Something is wrong with this whole story. Luke, very wrong. Then find out what it is before you sign anything. But how? Luke thought for a moment. My cousin works at the county clerk's office. We can take a look at the records, see what Edward has been buying, and figure out what he's really after. That night, the two of them went into town. The office was closed, but Luke's cousin had the keys. Among piles of yellowed documents and dusty books, they discovered something disturbing. Edward wasn't just buying land for a resort, he was consolidating a massive territory far larger than any tourist development would ever need. And there were mentions of geological surveys, drilling, and soil analysis. He's looking for something, Elena whispered, her eyes scanning the documents. But what? Luke pointed to a specific paper. Look at this. A permit for mineral research. Dated 6 months ago. Mining? But there's never been anything here but good soil for coffee, as far as we know. Luke grabbed another document. But what if there is? What if they found something valuable under this dirt? Elena felt the world spin. If it were true, 6 million wasn't generosity, it was a steal. Edward would be robbing her again, only this time with a signed contract. I need proof, she said, determination replacing her despair. I need to know exactly what is under my land. How? We don't have the equipment or the time, but I know someone who does. Elena grabbed her phone, searching for a contact she hadn't used in years. Professor Martin, my college advisor. He works in geology now. The call was answered on the third ring, a sleepy voice on the other end. Elena? It's 2 a.m. Professor, I'm sorry for the hour, but I need help. It's urgent. After quickly explaining the situation, the professor was silent for a long moment. Elena, if it's what I think it is, you might be sitting on a fortune. Or a massive problem. What do you mean? There are rumors in academic circles about mineral deposits in that region. Nothing officially confirmed, but enough to attract corporate interest. If Edward Sterling is after it this aggressively, it's because he knows something. Can you come here? Run the tests? I can be there tomorrow morning. But Elena, if we find something, you're going to become a target. Powerful people don't like losing out on valuable opportunities. The deadline is noon. We have to be fast. At dawn, the professor arrived with equipment and a small team. While they worked, drilling, analyzing, collecting samples, Elena watched the horizon. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky pink and gold, illuminating the land she loved, and which she now discovered held secrets deeper than she ever imagined. Her phone rang. Edward. 3 hours left, he said without preamble. I expect an answer. You'll get one, Elena promised, hanging up before he could say another word. Luke approached, bringing water. Are you ready for whatever comes next? She looked at the ranch, at the people working, at the uncertain future ahead. No, but I'm going to face it anyway. The clock read 10:45 when Professor Martin emerged from the excavation area. his face covered in red dust, and an expression Elena couldn't decipher. He walked toward her with slow, heavy steps, like someone carrying the weight of a massive revelation. "Elena, we need to talk," he said, taking off his safety goggles to reveal tired but bright eyes full of contained excitement. "Did you find something?" The professor looked around, making sure they were alone. Luke noticed the gesture and stepped away discreetly, giving them privacy. "What I'm about to tell you changes everything. Absolutely everything." He opened a small box and showed her some dark stones, seemingly worthless. To an untrained eye, it looked like common gravel. But the way the professor held the samples, with almost religious reverence, gave it away. "Niobium," he said simply, "and in quantities I've never seen in decades of my career. Your ranch is literally sitting on one of the largest niobium reserves in the country, maybe the world." Elena felt her legs go weak and leaned against the doorframe. "Niobium? How much is that worth?" "Billions. Not millions, Elena. Billions. This mineral is essential for the aerospace industry, high-end technology, and renewable energy. Global demand is skyrocketing and supply is limited. You are holding a fortune that makes Edward's $6 million look like pocket change." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Elena sat on the porch step, trying to process the information. The whole puzzle began to fit together. The mysterious purchases, the secrecy, the insistence, the generous offer that was actually a sophisticated robbery. "He knows," she whispered. "Edward knows this. That's why he's so desperate to buy." "No doubt. But here's the problem." The professor sat down beside her. "If you refuse the sale, he'll find other ways. People with that level of ambition don't give up easily." "What other ways?" "This is my land, my property." "Technically, yes. But mineral rights are complicated. The subsoil belongs to the government. Anyone can apply for a mining concession as long as they follow legal procedures. You would be compensated, but you wouldn't control the process. So I've already lost?" The bitterness in Elena's voice was palpable. "Not necessarily. You can apply for the concession before he does, but it would be a legal war, expensive and long, and Edward has resources you don't." Luke returned, bringing hot coffee. "Sorry to interrupt, but there are 40 minutes left on the deadline. What are we doing?" Elena looked at the two men, then at the land she now knew was worth an incalculable fortune. The decision she made in the next few minutes would determine not just her future, but the future of the entire region. "I need more information," she said, her mind working fast. "Professor, are these tests conclusive?" "Preliminary, but reliable. For absolute confirmation, I'd need more in-depth studies, which would take months. And if I ask Edward for that, if I demand a full geological study before signing anything, he'd never accept. It would reveal that he knows about the niobium, and he'd lose his leverage." "Exactly." Elena stood up, a spark of hope igniting in her chest. "And if he refuses, I'll have proof that he's deceiving me." "But you'd have no way to prove that," Luke intervened. "It's just a suspicion." "No." Elena grabbed her phone. "I have a witness. The professor just told me. And I have the samples. If I go to the media with this, I expose his game." "It would be dangerous," the professor warned. "Very dangerous. Men like Edward Sterling don't like being exposed. More dangerous than being robbed without knowing. More dangerous than losing everything that is rightfully mine." Her phone rang. Edward again. She took a deep breath before answering. "Ms. Carter, I trust you've reached a sensible decision." "I have, but I have one condition before I sign." There was a pause. "I'm listening. I want a full geological study of the property, done by an independent company, at your expense. And I only sign after I see the results." The silence on the other end was so long that Elena thought the call had dropped. When Edward finally spoke, his voice had lost all its artificial cordiality. "That is unnecessary and would delay the process by months." "Then I guess we don't have a deal, Mr. Sterling. Thank you for the offer." but I'd rather take my chances with the bank. Elena, don't be a fool. $6 million solves all your problems, or creates bigger ones. The answer is no. She hung up before he could respond, her hands shaking so hard. She almost dropped the phone. Luke held her shoulders, offering silent support. You just declared war, the professor said, impressed. I hope you know what you're getting into. Before Elena could answer, another car appeared on the road. This time it was a black, shiny pickup truck with tinted windows. Two men stepped out, both wearing suits despite the heat. They weren't lawyers. They had that rigid posture and vigilant gaze of private security or something worse. Elena Carter? Asked the taller one, a bald man with a scar on his eyebrow. Who's asking? Representatives of Mr. Sterling. He would like to speak with you in person. Now. There was no request in those words. It was a poorly disguised order. Elena felt fear try to paralyze her, but her anger was stronger. You can tell your boss that if he wants to talk, he can call like a civilized human being. I don't think you understand. The man took a step forward. It wasn't an invitation. Luke stepped between them and Elena. She said no. I think you'd better respect that. And who are you? The boyfriend playing the hero? I'm someone who knows the law, and I know that trespassing on private property leads to jail time. The man laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Trespassing? We were invited. By whom? Elena stepped forward, facing him despite her fear. Because I certainly didn't invite anyone. That was when they heard the sirens. Two police cruisers appeared on the road, kicking up dust. The professor had discreetly called the authorities as soon as he saw the men arriving. The sheriff stepped out of the car, a middle-aged man with a gray mustache and the tired expression of someone who had seen it all. Any problem here? None at all, Sheriff Santos, the man with the scar said, suddenly polite. Just delivering a message. Message delivered. Now you can leave. And next time, use the phone. The men exchanged a look, then got back into the truck and drove off. But before getting in, the one with the scar looked at Elena with an intensity that made her blood run cold. Are you okay? The sheriff asked, approaching. For now. Elena tried to smile but couldn't. Thank you for coming so fast, the professor called. And it's a good thing he did. Those guys didn't look like the type to take no for an answer. Can you investigate them? I can try. But if they work for who I think they work for, they'll have clean paperwork and perfect alibis. The sheriff sighed. Elena, I don't know what you've gotten yourself into, but I suggest you be very careful. Edward Sterling isn't just rich. He has connections that go deeper than you can imagine. After the police left, Elena, Luke, and the professor gathered in the ranch kitchen. The atmosphere was heavy, charged with tension and unspoken fear. There's still time to back out, Luke said softly. Take the money, sell the ranch, start over somewhere else, and let him win? After everything he did to my family? This isn't about revenge, Elena. It's about survival. She looked out the window, seeing the midday sun brutally illuminating the red earth. Her father used to say the land had a memory, that it held the tears and sweat of those who worked it, the hopes and dreams planted along with the seeds. I can't give up, she said finally. I can't betray everything this land represents. Then we're going to need a plan, the professor said, and we need to be smarter than him. Over the next few hours, they mapped out a strategy. The professor would contact university colleagues, independent geologists who could confirm the findings and testify if necessary. Luke would use his contacts in town to find out more about Edward's movements, who he had hired, and exactly which properties he had bought. And Elena? Elena would do what she had always done. Work the land, care for the animals, keep the routine. But this time, with her eyes wide open and her phone's voice recorder always ready whenever Edward or his people showed up. The afternoon brought an unexpected break, a call from the Department of Energy and Minerals, an official named Dr. Andrea Campbell with a firm, professional voice. Ms. Carter, we received an anonymous tip regarding possible irregularities in mineral concession requests in the Three Pines region. Your property was mentioned. Could you give us a few minutes? Elena looked at Luke and the professor before answering. Of course. How much time do you need? We'd like to send a team for an official inspection. Tomorrow, if possible. Tomorrow is perfect. After she hung up, Elena couldn't contain her smile. Someone had reported Edward. Someone with enough access and knowledge to know exactly what to do. Was it you? She asked the professor. He gave an enigmatic smile. Let's just say I have a few contacts who care about the legality of mineral concessions. This buys us time, Luke said. But it also speeds things up. Edward is going to know he's lost control of the situation. As if in response to his words, Elena's phone rang again. This time it was Robert, the lawyer. Elena, I need to talk to you. In person. It's important. His voice sounded different. Tense. Worried. Without the arrogant confidence from before. You can say it right here. No, not over the phone. Please, 1 hour. Alone. At the old church in town. Why would I trust you? Because I have information that could save your life. And because, contrary to what you think, not everyone who works for Edward Sterling agrees with his methods. The call ended, leaving Elena confused. Luke immediately protested. It's an obvious trap. Maybe. But what if it isn't? What if he really wants to help? Why would he do that? I don't know, but I have to find out. Then, I'm going with you. No. If it's a trap, I don't want you involved, but stay ready. If I don't call in an hour, call the sheriff. The old church in Three Pines was a 19th century building, abandoned for years after a new one was built in the main square. The stone walls were covered in ivy, and the broken stained glass windows let in jagged beams of light. Robert was already there when Elena arrived, sitting on a rotting wooden pew. He seemed to have aged years in a single day. His leather briefcase was at his feet, crumpled, as if it had been thrown in anger. Thank you for coming, he said, his voice echoing in the empty space. You have 5 minutes. Elena stood by the door, ready to run if necessary. Edward is planning something. Something that goes beyond buying your ranch. What kind of something? He has connections with dangerous people. Corrupt politicians, unscrupulous businessmen. The niobium on your land is just the beginning. He wants to create a monopoly, controlling all mineral extraction in the region. Why are you telling me this? Robert looked at his own hands as if he didn't recognize them. Because I've made many mistakes in my life. I helped men like Edward rob honest people. I lied. I manipulated contracts. I twisted the law. But there's a limit. And he crossed it. What limit? He laughed without humor. You'll find it ironic. But the limit is your ranch. Santa Rita. Elena frowned. Why? Because it was the first piece of land your father ever bought. Back in 1975. And do you know who he bought it from? Who? From my father. Robert stood up, walking toward one of the broken windows. My father owned half of Three Pines. He blew it all on gambling, drinking, and bad decisions. When he was on the brink of bankruptcy, your father offered to buy Santa Rita for a fair price. He saved my family from total misery. Elena felt the floor disappear beneath her feet. You're John Miller's son? He nodded. My father made me promise before he passed that if I ever had the chance to repay your father's kindness, I would. And now is my chance. Repay it how? He went back to the pew, opened the briefcase, and pulled out a stack of documents. Contracts, emails, recordings, everything you need to prove Edward is acting illegally. Bribery of public officials, falsification of environmental reports, threats to small landowners. It's all here. Elena's hands shook as she took the documents. Why are you risking your career for this? Because some debts are more important than careers. Robert smiled sadly. And because there comes a moment when you have to look in the mirror and decide what kind of person you want to be. He could destroy you for this. He'll try. But I have copies stored in safe places. If anything happens to me, everything comes to light automatically. Elena flipped through the papers quickly. It was a goldmine of incriminating information, enough to not only stop Edward, but possibly put him behind bars. What do you want in exchange? Nothing, just that you use this wisely, and if possible, keep my name out of it when it all blows up. I can't promise that. I know. But I had to try. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the encounter hanging between them like smoke. Your father would be proud, Robert said finally, of the man he was and the daughter he has. Before Elena could respond, they heard the sound of engines. Many engines. Robert turned pale. He followed me. You need to get out. Now. And you? I'll buy you time. Go out the back. There's a trail that leads to the river. Follow it back to town. Elena hesitated for only a second before running. When she reached the back door of the church, she looked back. Robert was standing tall, his back rigid, facing the main entrance like a soldier facing his final battle. She ran down the trail, the folder pressed against her chest, her heart beating so hard it felt like it would burst. Behind her, she heard voices, shouting, the sound of something breaking. And then, as she crossed the bridge over the river, she heard something that made her blood freeze. A scream. Robert's scream. Elena ran without looking back, her lungs burning, her feet tripping over the uneven stones of the trail. Robert's folder was clutched to her chest, as if it were the most valuable thing in the world, and at that moment, it was. Every document inside represented not just evidence against Edward, but the sacrifice of a man trying to redeem the mistakes of his past. When she finally reached the opposite bank of the river, she hid behind a rock formation, trying to catch her breath and listen for anyone following her. The silence was disturbing. Not even the birds were singing. It was as if nature itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. She pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed Luke. He answered on the first ring. Elena, where are you? I heard sirens heading toward the old church. I'm on the east side of the river. Luke, Robert gave me documents, proof against Edward. And now he's in danger. I'm coming to get you. Stay where you are. No, we can't expose you too. I need you to keep this evidence somewhere safe, somewhere no one would think to look. I know just the place, a place only the two of us know. The cave. Elena felt a pang of nostalgia. When they were children, she and Luke had discovered a small cave on the ranch, their secret spot where they hid childhood treasures and shared dreams. She hadn't been there in years. I'll meet you there in 20 minutes. Elena followed trails she had known since she was a child, moving through the shadows, avoiding the main road. When she reached the cave entrance, hidden by vines and bushes, Luke was already there with a flashlight and a worried expression. Are you okay? He asked, checking her over for injuries. Physically, yes. But Robert... Luke, I heard him scream. He put his hands on her shoulders, forcing her to look him in the eye. You can't blame yourself. He made a choice. Now we have to make sure it wasn't in vain. They entered the cave, the flashlight illuminating familiar walls where charcoal drawings they had made years ago were still visible. Hearts, names, childhood promises of eternal friendship. It all seemed so innocent, so distant from the brutal reality they faced now. Luke pulled a heavy-duty plastic bag from his backpack. Put everything in here. I'll seal it and bury it at the back of the cave. Even if they tear the whole ranch apart, they won't think to look here. While he worked, Elena examined the documents Robert had given her more carefully. There were emails exchanged between Edward and government officials, offering bribes in exchange for fast-tracking permits, fraudulent contracts with shell companies, environmental reports that were clearly forged, and something even more disturbing, a list of names of people who had opposed Edward in other projects. Beside each name were notes. Some said persuaded, others transferred, some simply said resolved. Elena felt a chill as she realized she was looking at a methodical record of how Edward eliminated obstacles, not necessarily through extreme measures, but with a cold efficiency that was just as terrifying. "Luke, look at this," she said, showing him the list. "These people, we need to warn them. Some aren't even in the region anymore, and the ones who are probably don't even know they were being monitored." Luke tucked the last document into the plastic bag. "But we can try to contact them discreetly." They left the cave just as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The beauty of the moment contrasted brutally with the situation they were in. Back at the house, they found Professor Martin waiting on the porch with a grim expression. "There's bad news," he said bluntly. "Robert Miller was found unconscious in the church. He's in a coma at the hospital. The police are treating it as an accident. They say he slipped and hit his head." "Liar!" Elena spat the word. "He was attacked." "I know. You know. But without proof or witnesses, it's your word against the official version." The professor sighed. "And there's more. The team from the department that was coming tomorrow has been canceled. Orders from above. Someone with a lot of influence intervened." "Edward." Elena felt the rage burning in her chest. "He has people inside the government." "It seems so. But there is a silver lining. The tip caught the attention of others. Investigative journalists, environmental activists, even some opposition lawmakers. The case is starting to gain traction on social media." Luke pulled out his phone and showed Elena. Hashtags about Three Pines and illegal mining were starting to trend. Photos of the town, the old church, even Santa Rita Ranch were being shared. "How did this start?" Elena asked, stunned. "Me," the professor admitted with a half-smile. "I called a few contacts in the press, planted the seed. The rest grew organically." For the first time in days, Elena felt a spark of hope. Maybe she wasn't as alone as she thought. Maybe there were people willing to fight against injustice, even without knowing her personally. But the hope was short-lived. Sheriff Santos appeared shortly after, with two officers Elena didn't recognize. "Elena Carter?" he said formally, his tone very different from their previous encounter. "Yes? I need you to come with me to give a statement regarding the incident at the church. I wasn't there when Robert got hurt, but you were there shortly before. Witnesses saw the two of you talking." "What witnesses?" Elena felt the trap closing. "That will be cleared up at the station. Please, don't make this harder than it needs to be." Luke stepped forward. "She has a right to a lawyer, and she'll have one at the station." The sheriff looked at Elena with an expression that seemed like an apology mixed with resignation. "Shall we?" At the station, Elena was placed in a cold, windowless interrogation room. She waited for nearly an hour before anyone appeared. When the door finally opened, it wasn't Sheriff Santos who walked in. It was Edward Sterling. He closed the door behind him and sat in the chair opposite her, studying her with those cold blue eyes. "Do you know what your problem is, Elena?" he said calmly. "You don't understand how the world works. And you came here to give me a lesson. I came to offer you one last chance, one that won't be repeated." He slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a check. $10 million. Sell the ranch. Take the money. Disappear to Chicago, New York, wherever you want. Live your life in peace. And if I refuse? Edward leaned back in his chair, interlacing his fingers. "Then things are going to get very unpleasant for you. The hospital might discover that Robert owed you money, that the two of you argued over it, that perhaps you weren't happy with his refusal. Accidents happen when people get nervous, impulsive. You can't be serious." Elena felt nausea rise in her throat. "You're trying to frame me for something your thugs did?" "Thugs?" Edward laughed. "I have no idea what you're talking about. I was in the city all day. I have dozens of witnesses. You, on the other hand, were alone in a church with a man who is now in a coma. This is insane. It's strategic." Edward stood up. "You have until noon tomorrow. After that, I let justice take its course. And trust me, you won't like how it ends." He knocked on the door. An officer opened it immediately, as if he had been waiting right outside. Edward left without looking back. Elena was released an hour later, without formal charges, but with the clear message that she was being watched. Luke was waiting for her outside with the professor. "What did he say?" Luke asked as soon as they got into the car. Elena told them everything as they drove back to the ranch. When she finished, both men were tense and worried. "He's bluffing," the professor said, but his voice didn't sound convinced. "He can't manipulate an investigation that blatantly." "He can," Luke corrected. "With enough money and connections, he can do whatever he wants. The question is, what do we do now?" Helena looked out the window at the familiar landscape. The land her father had worked, that her grandfather had cultivated, that generations of the Miller family had loved and protected. The land she now discovered was worth more than she had ever imagined. "Let's fight," she said simply, "but let's do it smart." That night, the three of them developed a plan. The professor would contact journalists from major outlets in the capital, people Edward Vance couldn't intimidate so easily. Lucas would visit Raphael in the hospital to see if there were security cameras at the church or in the surrounding area. And Helena? Helena would do exactly what Edward least expected. She would go to him and negotiate. "Are you crazy?" Lucas protested. "He could do anything to you. Not if I go with witnesses and record everything." Helena was already grabbing her phone. "I'm going to propose a deal. He buys the ranch, but at a fair price. $20 million. And on the condition that the mineral extraction follows all environmental and labor regulations, that he hires locals, that he invests in the town's infrastructure. He'll never accept that. Maybe not. But it will give me time to implement the second part of the plan." "What second part?" Helena smiled, and there was something fierce in that smile. "I'm going to do what he did. I'm going public. I'll give interviews, tell my story, and expose everything. If he wants to play dirty, let's see who can handle more public pressure." In the early hours of the morning, Helena called Edward and arranged a meeting at the town's main diner, a public place with constant foot traffic. Surprisingly, he accepted without much resistance. When she arrived, he was already there, sipping coffee and reading the newspaper as if it were any other day. He wore an impeccable suit, his hair was perfectly styled, and he had the calm expression of someone who had slept well. "Changed your mind?" he asked as she sat down. "I have a counterproposal." She detailed the terms while he listened without interrupting. When she finished, Edward took a sip of his coffee, looking thoughtful. $20 million. Interesting. It's still a bargain considering the property's real value, but I admit it's fairer than the previous offer. "So you accept?" "On one condition. You sign a non-disclosure agreement. Nothing that has happened in the last few days can be mentioned publicly. No interviews, no social media, no comments. Impossible. Then we have no deal." Edward folded his newspaper carefully. "And you'll have to deal with the consequences of your stubbornness." "What consequences, specifically?" He stood up, placing money on the table to pay for the coffee. "You'll find out soon enough. Have a good day, Helena." She watched him leave, feeling like she had lost that round. But the war was far from over. When she returned to the ranch, she found unusual activity. Cars were parked everywhere and people were moving around. Her heart raced, fearing the worst. But as she got closer, she saw they weren't Edward's goons. They were reporters, dozens of them with cameras, microphones, and recorders. The professor had done his part. The press was there. "Helena Miller?" A reporter approached, holding out a microphone. "Can we talk about the situation at Miller Ranch and the allegations of illegal mineral extraction?" Helena looked at the cameras, at the expectant faces, and at the opportunity presented before her. "Yes, we can," she said, squaring her shoulders. "I have a lot to tell you." The cameras flashed like fireflies around Helena as she told her story. Every word was measured, every detail double-checked in her mind before being spoken. She talked about the heritage, the debts, and Edward's offer that seemed too generous. But when she got to the part about the niobium and the evidence Raphael had given her, She hesitated. "I can't show the documents right now," she said carefully, "because they are being held as evidence for an official investigation. But I can guarantee there is concrete proof of irregularities." A reporter with short hair and a sharp gaze stepped forward. "Ms. Miller, Edward Vance issued a statement just a few minutes ago denying all accusations. He claims you are trying to extort more money from him using defamation." Helena felt her blood boil, but she kept her cool. "Extort? I turned down $10 million. If I wanted easy money, I would have taken it already. But is it true you have significant debts with the bank?" "It is true, and I've never hidden that. But I'd rather lose everything honestly than gain a fortune dishonestly." The interviews stretched on for hours. Some reporters were clearly skeptical, while others seemed genuinely interested in uncovering the truth. When they finally left, Helena was exhausted but also strangely energized. Lucas brought news from the hospital. Raphael had woken up from his coma, but he was confused, unable to clearly remember what had happened. The doctor said it was normal after head trauma, but Helena suspected there was more behind that convenient amnesia. "Does he remember you?" she asked. "Vaguely. He knows we met, but he doesn't remember what we talked about or the documents." Lucas looked frustrated. It's like someone erased exactly the part we needed. Too convenient to be a coincidence. The professor entered the room carrying his laptop. "You guys need to see this." He opened a news site. The headline read, "Heiress accuses tycoon of attempted land grab for minerals." Below it were photos of Helena, the ranch, and surprisingly, an old photo of Edward standing next to a politician known for corruption scandals. "Who found this photo?" Helena asked, impressed. "Real investigative journalism." The professor smiled. "They've started digging into Edward's past. And the more they dig, the more dirt they find." Over the next few hours, more articles were published. Stories of other people who had lost land to Edward under suspicious circumstances. Reports of companies forced to sell for pennies on the dollar. A pattern was emerging, showing not a visionary businessman, but a systematic predator. Helena's phone rang. It was an unknown number, but she answered anyway. "Ms. Miller, my name is Marcia Torres. I'm an attorney specializing in environmental and mining law. I read about your case, and I'd like to offer my services pro bono." "Pro bono? Why?" "Because I've seen men like Edward Vance destroy entire communities in the name of profit. And because I believe some cases are worth more than money." Helena looked at Lucas and the professor, who were watching expectantly. "I accept. When can we talk? I'm arriving in Three Palms tomorrow morning. Can we meet at the ranch?" "Perfect." That night, for the first time in weeks, Helena slept with a little less weight on her chest. There were allies now. People who believed in her, who were willing to fight by her side. But the relief was brief. The next morning, before Marcia even arrived, Helena was woken up by shouting. She ran outside and found smoke rising from the barn. Fire. Lucas and the professor were already there, trying to contain the flames with extinguishers that clearly weren't enough. Helena called the fire department while grabbing buckets, organizing a makeshift line to get water from the well. The firefighters arrived 20 minutes later, but the barn was already destroyed. Years of tools, stored seeds, and equipment that Helena didn't have the money to replace were all turned to ash. The fire captain examined the wreckage. "It was arson," he said bluntly. "We found traces of accelerant. Kerosene, most likely." "Are there cameras?" one of the firefighters asked. "No." Helena felt tears of rage burn her eyes. "I never thought I'd need them." Sheriff Santos arrived shortly after, along with the same officers from the night before. This time his expression was one of genuine concern. "This has gone too far," he muttered, surveying the destruction. "Helena, I need you to be honest with me. Do you have any enemies besides Edward Vance?" "Not that I know of." "And would he have a reason to do this?" Helena looked at the smoking ruins. "Plenty of reasons. But proving it is another story. I'll increase patrols in the area. And I suggest you and your friends stay alert. Whoever did this might come back. After everyone left, Helena, Lucas, and the professor sat on the porch, looking at what was left of the barn. The message was clear. Edward was escalating the conflict. Marcia Torres arrived at noon, a woman in her late 40s with black hair pulled back in a bun and eyes that seemed capable of cutting through lies. She listened to everything Helena had to tell her, taking meticulous notes and asking precise questions. The documents Raphael gave you, do you still have them? They're hidden in a safe place. I'm going to need them, and we need to authenticate them to ensure they can be used as legal evidence. How do we do that without exposing where they are? Marcia smiled. I know a trusted expert. We can discreetly take them to a lab for analysis. If they're authentic, and I believe they are, we'll have grounds for both criminal and civil lawsuits. The afternoon was spent planning legal strategies. Marcia explained they would have to fight on several fronts simultaneously: a court injunction to block land sales in the region, a report to the federal prosecutor's office, and a public civil action for environmental damages, all coordinated to maximize pressure on Edward. But we have to be fast, she warned. Men with his resources know how to bury cases in bureaucracy. Our window of opportunity is small. How much time do we have? Days. Maybe a week if we're lucky. That night, while they were preparing the documents to send to the expert, Helena heard a noise outside. It wasn't the wind. It was the distinct sound of footsteps trying to be silent. Lucas, turn off the light, she whispered. They sat in the dark, listening. The footsteps were approaching the house, more than one person. Helena felt her heart race. Call the police, the professor murmured. But before they could do anything, the front door swung open. Helena gripped a heavy candlestick, ready to defend herself. Don't attack, a female voice whispered urgently. It's me, Julia, Edward's assistant. The lights flickered on, revealing a young woman in her early 20s, blonde and visibly terrified. She was alone, dressed in dark clothes, looking nervously behind her. What are you doing here? Helena asked, still holding the candlestick. I came to warn you. Edward is planning something for tomorrow. Something big. What kind of something? Julia took a deep breath. He bribed some officials at the county clerk's office. They're going to forge documents showing that your family never had legal possession of the ranch, that everything was based on a fake deed from the very beginning. That's absurd. My father bought this land legally, I know. But with the forged documents and bought witnesses, he can create enough doubt to freeze any sale or deal until the case is resolved, and with his contacts in the judiciary, that could take years. Why are you telling us this? Lucas asked suspiciously. Because I've worked for that man long enough to know he won't stop. And because, Julia looked directly at Helena, my grandmother lost her land to Edward 10 years ago. She tried to fight, got sick from the stress, and eventually gave up. She spent the last years of her life broken and bitter. I'm so sorry, Helena said sincerely. Me too. And I don't want to see that happen to anyone else. Julia pulled a flash drive from her pocket. This has copies of emails, payment orders, everything that proves the forgery scheme. Use it carefully. Marcia took the flash drive as if it were a precious treasure. This changes everything. With this evidence, we can go to the federal prosecutor tomorrow morning. There's more, Julia said. Edward is planning to leave the country tomorrow night. He has a private jet waiting. If you want to stop him, you have to act fast. After Julia left, they spent the night examining the contents of the flash drive. It was devastating. It didn't just confirm everything they suspected. It revealed a much larger scheme involving dozens of properties, hundreds of millions in illegal profits, and a corruption network that stretched all the way to the Capitol. We need to take this to the authorities now, Marcia said, already reaching for her phone. But who can we trust? The professor questioned. If he has people inside the system, any wrong move could alert him. I know a federal prosecutor, an old law school classmate, absolutely incorruptible. Marcia dialed a number. We're going straight to the top. The call was answered. Marcia quickly explained the situation, her voice firm and professional. After several minutes, she hung up with a satisfied expression. He wants to see us in D.C. tomorrow, first thing, with all the evidence. How are we going to get there in time? Helena asked. It's over 600 miles. Marcia smiled. I have a client who owns a small plane. He owes me a favor. We can be in D.C. in a few hours. While they were organizing the trip, Lucas stayed by the window, keeping watch. We have company, he said suddenly. Outside on the road, a car was parked with its headlights off, just watching. They know, Helena said, feeling a chill down her spine. Edward knows Julia was here. Marcia's phone rang. It was Julia. Her voice was trembling, terrified. They found out. They're looking for me. I don't know what to do. Where are you? At a hotel in town. But I don't know how much longer I'll be safe. Marcia looked at Helena. Can we go get her? It's risky, the professor said. It could be a trap. Or it could be a young woman who needs help, Helena countered. I'm not abandoning her. The decision was made. Lucas and Helena would go get Julia, while Marcia and the professor protected the evidence and prepared for the trip to D.C. The hotel was in the center of Three Palms, a modest 3-story building. Julia was waiting for them in the lobby with a small backpack, her eyes red from crying. Thank you for coming, she said, her voice cracking. They were leaving when 2 men blocked the door, the same ones from before, including the one with the scar on his eyebrow. Julia Mendonça, he said, completely ignoring Helena and Lucas. Your employer would like to speak with you. I don't work for him anymore. That's not a choice. Lucas stepped between them. She said she's not going. Now, get out of the way. The man laughed. Kid, you really don't know who you're messing with. That's when the sirens started. Police cruisers surrounded the hotel, red and blue lights illuminating the night. Sheriff Santos stepped out of one of them, accompanied by several officers. You two, he said, pointing at the men. Hands where I can see them. On what charge? The one with the scar asked, but his confidence was shaken. Trespassing, making threats, harassment. For starters. Santos looked at Helena. Marcia called me. She explained the situation. You're safe now. The men were detained, still protesting that they had rights and that their lawyers would hear about this. But Helena wasn't listening. She was looking at Julia, who had collapsed in tears of relief. You're going to be okay, Helena said, hugging the young woman. You did the right thing. That night, protected by the police, they returned to the ranch. At 5 a.m, a small plane landed on a makeshift strip at the back of the property. Helena, Marcia, and the professor boarded, taking all the meticulously organized evidence with them. Lucas and Julia would stay behind, protected by guards the sheriff had managed to assign. Come back soon, Lucas said, holding Helena's hand a moment longer than necessary. I will, with justice. As the plane took off, Helena looked down, watching the ranch grow smaller and smaller. The land that represented generations of work, dreams, and struggles. The land that could now finally be protected. We're getting close to the end, the professor said, looking out the window. Or the beginning, Helena replied. It depends on how you look at it. Marcia was reviewing the documents for the 100th time. When we present this to the prosecutor, there's no turning back. Edward will know he's lost. Then let him know, Helena said with determination. It's long past time he paid for his mistakes. The sun rose as they flew toward Washington, D.C., illuminating a new day full of possibilities and dangers, hope and uncertainty. But for the first time since everything had started, Helena felt like she was finally taking control of her own story. The federal prosecutor's office was in an imposing building in downtown D.C., all glass and concrete reflecting the morning sun. Helena felt her legs shake as she climbed the steps, carrying the folder with the evidence that could change everything. Marcia walked beside her with professional confidence, but even she seemed tense. Prosecutor August Cavalcanti received them in a large office lined with shelves full of law books and case files. He was a middle-aged man with well-cut white hair and a penetrating gaze that seemed to evaluate every word before it was even spoken. Marcia, it's been a long time, he said, shaking the lawyer's hand before turning to Helena. And you must be the brave Ms. Miller I've heard so much about. I don't know if I'm brave or just stubborn, Helena replied. Sometimes they're the same thing. He pointed to the chairs. Sit down. Let's get to business. Over the next 3 hours, Helena and Marcia presented every document, every recording, and every piece of evidence against Edward. The prosecutor listened in silence, taking occasional notes, his expression growing darker by the minute. This is explosive, he said finally, leaning back in his chair. If even half of this is verifiable, we're talking about one of the largest land-grabbing and corruption operations I've ever seen. Everything is verifiable, Marcia guaranteed. We have sources, dates, bank transfers. It's solid. And the source who provided the most recent documents, this Julia, is she willing to testify? She is. And there's another person who can corroborate everything. Rafael Mendez, Edward's lawyer, who is in a coma, the prosecutor reminded them. But he's awake. And even with his memory compromised, his testimony about Edward's methods could be invaluable. August drummed his fingers on the desk, thinking, You understand that if I open an official investigation, Edward will know immediately? He has enough connections to be alerted. That's why we're asking for absolute secrecy, Marcia said. And if possible, that asset freeze orders be issued before he is notified. That requires judicial authorization. I'll need to convince a judge that there's a flight risk and a risk of asset concealment. He has a private jet prepped to leave the country tonight, Helena informed him. If that doesn't define a flight risk, I don't know what does. The prosecutor picked up the phone. I'm going to make some calls. You can wait in the next room. The wait was agonizing. Helena paced back and forth, unable to sit still. The professor tried to read documents but was clearly distracted. Marcia, the only one who seemed calm, reviewed her notes and prepared for possible scenarios. 2 hours later, August called them back in. I got it, he said, with evident satisfaction. I have search and seizure warrants for Edward Vance's office and residence. Bank accounts are frozen, and there's an order to prevent him from leaving the country. Helena felt tears burn her eyes. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's not over yet. August gathered the papers. The operation will be launched at dawn tomorrow. Coordinated simultaneously in 3 cities. We need total surprise. And what about Helena? The professor asked. Is she safe? I'll arrange for police protection. Until this is over, you'll have an escort. When they left the building, it was late afternoon. Helena immediately called Lucas. How are things there? Tense. There was some strange movement this afternoon. Cars driving by slowly, looking at the property. The sheriff put more men on watch. Tomorrow morning everything changes, Helena promised. Hang in there for just one more day. That night, staying in a discreet hotel in D.C. under police protection, Helena could hardly sleep. Every sound in the hallway made her jump. Every vibration of her phone made her heart race. At 4 a.m, she gave up on trying to sleep and went to the window, watching the silent city. Marcia knocked on the door shortly after, also awake. Nervous? Terrified, Helena admitted. What if something goes wrong? What if he escapes? He won't escape. Marcia sat down beside her. August is relentless once he decides to prosecute someone. And with the evidence we have, Edward has no way out. At 5:30, Marcia's phone rang. It was August. It started, he said simply. 50 federal agents are executing the warrants right now. I'll keep you informed. The next few minutes were torturous. Helena followed the news on her phone, but there was nothing yet. Total media silence, a sign that the operation was truly being kept under wraps. At 6:15, the first message arrived. Edward Vance's main office surrounded, documents being seized. 6:30, residence raided. Edward Vance detained for questioning. Helena felt a wave of relief so intense she had to lean against the wall. They did it. They actually did it. But the joy was short-lived. Another message arrived, this time from Lucas. Problems here. Connection dropped. Can't reach the sheriff. Something is wrong. Helena called immediately, but Lucas's phone went straight to voicemail. She tried Sheriff Santos. Nothing. She tried Julia. Silence. Marcia, something is wrong in 3 Palms. The lawyer immediately called August, explaining the situation. He promised to check and call back. When he called back 10 minutes later, minutes that felt like hours, his voice was tense. There was an incident, an attempted raid on the ranch. Shots were fired. No one was hurt, but what? The house caught fire. Firefighters are on the scene, but the fire is out of control. Helena felt the floor drop out from under her. The house where she was born, where she grew up, where every room held memories of an entire lifetime. Are they okay? Lucas and Julia? They are. They were evacuated in time. But Helena? I'm so sorry. The house is a total loss. She hung up the phone and just stood there, processing the information. Everything destroyed. The barn had already burned, and now the house. Edward, even while being detained, had managed to strike one last blow. Let's go there, she said, her voice emotionless. Now. Marcia organized immediate transport. A federal police helicopter would take them back to Three Palms. During the flight, Helena stared out the window without really seeing the landscape. Her mind was numb, unable to process the magnitude of the loss. When the helicopter landed near the ranch, Helena saw the smoke before she saw anything else. A black column rising into the sky, visible for miles. Lucas ran to meet her as soon as she stepped down. He had soot on his face, torn clothes, and eyes red from the smoke. Helena, I tried. I tried to save what I could, but... Are you okay? Is Julia okay? We are. The professor too. But the house... They walked to where the firefighters were still working, pouring water over the smoking ruins. The wooden structure that had supported the house for over 100 years had collapsed. All that remained were blackened brick walls and ashes. Helena got as close as the firefighters would allow. There, in that pile of debris, was her childhood. The family photos, her father's books, the table where they shared meals, the porch where she and Lucas had talked for hours. All gone. The fire captain approached. It was intentional. We found 3 different points of origin. Kerosene again. We caught one of the men, Sheriff Santos said, appearing beside them. He was trying to escape through the woods. He's already confessed he was hired by intermediaries of Edward Vance. So we have more proof, Marcia said, ever practical. This only strengthens the case. But Helena wasn't listening. She was looking at the land beyond the destroyed house. The red earth that remained, untouched by the fire, indifferent to human destruction. He can burn down buildings, she said softly. But he can't burn the land. He can't destroy what really matters. Lucas put his hand on her shoulder. We'll rebuild. We'll all help. No. Helena turned to face him, and there was a burning determination in her eyes. We're going to do better than rebuild. We're going to turn this into something Edward never imagined. What do you mean? She looked at Marcia. That resort he wanted to build. Sustainable tourism, jobs for the town. What if we did that? But honestly respecting the environment, truly benefiting the community? Do you have the capital for that? The professor asked, interested. I have the most valuable land in the region. With the niobium being extracted legally and sustainably, I can fund the development without needing to sell to anyone. I can create jobs, bring life back to Three Palms. Julia approached timidly. I could help. I know all the plans Edward had. I know what works and what was just for show. The idea began to take shape. Marcia could handle the legal side, ensuring all licenses and permits were properly obtained. The professor could coordinate the environmental studies, making sure the mineral extraction was done without damaging the ecosystem. Lucas, with his veterinary background, could develop programs to preserve the local wildlife. And Three Palms, the town that was dying, could be reborn. In the following days, as the investigation against Edward moved forward, Helena worked tirelessly on the new project. She slept little and ate even less, but for the first time in months, she felt truly alive. Edward remained in custody, prevented from communicating freely as the investigation deepened. Every day brought new revelations, new crimes discovered, and more people coming forward to testify against him. Raphael, recovering in the hospital, began to regain fragments of his memory, With Marcia's help, he provided detailed depositions about years of illegal practices. A week after the fire, August Cavalcanti held a press conference. Beside him, projections showed charts of illegal financial transfers, maps of properties obtained fraudulently, and photos of forged documents. Edward Vance built an empire on lies and exploitation, the prosecutor declared. But today, that empire begins to crumble. He is being formally charged with crimes against public property, corruption, land grabbing, racketeering, and attempted murder. Reporters exploded with questions. August answered calmly and methodically, building a devastating narrative. Helena watched the press conference on television, alongside Lucas, Marcia, and the professor. When it ended, she turned off the TV and took a deep breath. "It's over," Lucas said. "It's really over." "No." Helena stood up. "Now it truly begins. Now we build the future." They worked through the following weeks, turning plans into reality. The first thing was to clear the debris from the house. Helena decided not to rebuild it exactly as it was. Instead, she would create a visitor center, telling the story of the ranch, the region, and the people who had fought for that land. The new house would be built in a different spot, modern but respecting traditional architecture. A place for new beginnings, not just memories. Serious investors began to appear, attracted not just by the niobium, but by the vision of sustainable development. Helena turned down several buyout offers but accepted partnerships that respected her principles. Three Palms began to change. Abandoned shops reopened. Young people who had left started to return, drawn by jobs and opportunities. The main square, once empty, was full of life again. A month after the operation, Helena visited Raphael in the hospital. He was recovering well, preparing to be discharged. "I came to say, thank you," she said, sitting beside his bed. "For what?" "I almost died and lost everything. For choosing what was right, even when it cost you everything. For honoring your father's memory and mine." Raphael smiled weakly. "My father used to say it's never too late to do the right thing." "I think I finally understand what he meant." "What are you going to do now?" "Honestly, I don't know. My career as a lawyer is over. No one will want to hire me after all this." Helena thought for a moment. "I'm in need of a lawyer. Someone who knows the region, who understands the people, and who has learned from his mistakes." "Are you serious?" "Completely. It won't be easy, and it won't pay well at first. But it will be honest." Raphael reached out his hand. "Then I accept." Julia also found a new purpose. With her knowledge of Edward's plans, she became an essential consultant in developing the tourism project, ensuring they avoided the mistakes he had planned to make. And Lucas? Lucas stayed by Helena's side through everything, a constant support, a reassuring presence, until one night, 2 months after everything began, while they were watching the sunset from the porch of the temporary house, he finally said what he had been holding back for so long. "Helena, you know I've always been here for you." "I know. And I'm eternally grateful. It's not gratitude I want." He turned her to face him. "It's more than friendship. It always has been. I was just waiting for the right moment to say it." Helena looked into those eyes she had known since childhood, at the face that had become as familiar as her own reflection. And she realized that what she felt was also more than friendship. Maybe it always had been. They kissed as the sun disappeared over the horizon, painting the sky in impossible shades of orange and purple. And for the first time in a long time, Helena felt she was exactly where she was meant to be. 6 months had passed since the night everything almost fell apart. Miller Ranch was unrecognizable, but in a way that would make any of Helena's ancestors burst with pride. Where there was once only pasture and a century-old house, there was now a harmonious complex of buildings that integrated into the natural landscape instead of dominating it. The visitor center was nearly finished, its glass walls offering panoramic views of the red earth, while interactive displays told the story not just of the ranch, but of all the families who had fought for their land in the region. Raphael had suggested they even include the story of his own father as a warning about the dangers of addiction and poor choices. Helena was walking through the property on a Saturday morning, inspecting the progress. Niobium extraction had begun in a carefully demarcated area, following all environmental protocols. Professor Martins personally supervised every stage, ensuring the ecological impact was minimized. "Ms. Miller," one of the engineers called out, waving from a distance. "You need to see this." She approached and found an unexpected discovery. While excavating for one of the containment structures, they had found fossils, ancient bones preserved in the red earth, possibly from prehistoric animals. "This is incredible," Helena murmured, looking at the delicate markings being exposed. "We're going to need to call in paleontologists." "I've already called the university," the professor said, arriving with his characteristic enthusiasm. "They're sending a team tomorrow. This could turn the site into a place of scientific importance." "One more reason to protect this land," Helena said, smiling. As she walked back to the new house, her phone rang. It was Marcia. "I have news. Edward's trial has been set. 3 months from now. And the chances? With all the evidence, witnesses, and the confessions of several accomplices? He's going to spend decades in prison." Marcia paused. "He asked to speak with you." "With me? Why?" "He didn't say. But the defense attorney claims it's important for his process of acceptance, that he wants to apologize in person." Helena thought for a long moment. Part of her didn't want to give Edward the satisfaction of seeing her again. But another part, the part that had learned that forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, but rather releasing the weight of hatred, knew she needed to do it. "I'll go. But you're coming with me." Of course. The federal prison where Edward was being held was 2 hours away. When they arrived, they were met by guards who led them through colorless corridors to a guarded visiting room. Edward entered a few minutes later. Helena almost didn't recognize him. The man who had been so imposing, so confident, was now hunched and aged. His hair was completely white, his eyes sunken, and his hands trembled slightly. "Helena," he said, his voice raspy, "thank you for coming." She didn't answer, just watched him sit in the opposite chair, separated by a cold metal table. "I know nothing I say can fix what I've done," he began. "Not just to you, but to dozens of other families. I've spent these months thinking, trying to understand how I got to this point." "And did you?" Edward laughed bitterly. "Ambition. Greed. The illusion that having more meant being more. I started by justifying every shortcut, every questionable decision, until I no longer knew where the line was between business and crime." "Why my father?" Helena asked, the question that had haunted her. "Why destroy him specifically?" "Because he was good." Edward looked at his own hands. "Genuinely good, and good men make me feel small. So I convinced myself he was naive, weak, that he deserved to lose for not being smart enough. And now? Now I see that the weakness was mine. Your father died with dignity, surrounded by people who loved him. I'm going to die alone in a cell, hated by everyone I ever knew. Who was really the weak one?" Helena felt tears burn, but not from sadness. It was something more complex, a mix of anger, pity, and finally, release. "I didn't come here to absolve you," she said firmly. "I didn't come to say it's okay, because it's not. You destroyed lives, families, and dreams, and you're going to pay for that. I know, but I also didn't come to feed hatred. This ranch, this land, is going to prosper, not because of revenge, but in spite of it. We're going to build something beautiful where you only saw profit. We're going to create community where you created division." Edward nodded slowly. "I hope you do. I genuinely hope so. I also want you to know something." Helena stood up. "My father forgave you before he died. Not because you deserved it, but because he deserved peace. Now I'm doing the same. Not for you, but for me." She walked out without looking back, Marcia by her side. "How do you feel?" the lawyer asked when they reached the car. "Light. For the first time in years, truly light." Back in Three Palms, the town was celebrating. It was the day of the official grand opening of the first hotel in the tourism complex. Colorful banners decorated the main street, musicians played in the square, and the smell of traditional food hung in the air. Lucas was waiting for her at the hotel entrance, wearing a suit for the first time Helena had ever seen. He looked handsome, uncomfortable, but handsome. "Ready for this?" he asked, reaching out his hand. More than ever. They entered the main hall together, where nearly 200 people were gathered. Townspeople, investors, partners, and journalists. The chatter died down as Helena stepped onto the small stage. She looked at those faces, some known since childhood, others new, all of them hopeful. Three Palms was dying, she began, her voice steady. We all knew it. The shops closing, the young people leaving, the future seeming further and further away. But death is not a destination. It's just a phase before rebirth. She pointed to the windows, where the ranch could be seen in the distance. My father used to say the land has a memory, that it holds the tears and the sweat of those who worked it. This land has seen generations of honest farmers struggling to survive. It has seen families torn apart by others' greed, but it has also seen resistance, hope, and love. Her voice faltered for a moment, but she continued. Today we open more than just a hotel. We open a promise, the promise that development and preservation can coexist, that profit and ethics are not enemies, that we can grow without destroying. The applause began, timid at first, then growing into a wave of sound that filled the hall. Helena saw Julia wiping away tears, Raphael smiling with genuine pride, and the professor waving enthusiastically. And she saw Lucas, his eyes saying, everything words never could. After the speeches, the official opening, the ribbon cutting, and the photos, Helena escaped to the balcony. She needed a moment of silence to breathe and process the magnitude of what they had achieved. Lucas found her there, bringing 2 glasses of champagne. "For you," he said, offering one. "To the woman who turned ashes into hope. I didn't do it alone. I know that. But it was you who refused to give up when it would have been much easier. When any reasonable person would have taken the money and run. Maybe I'm not reasonable. Maybe that's exactly why I love you." Helena looked at him, seeing not just her childhood friend, but the partner and companion who had been by her side through the worst and now shared the best. "Marry me?" she said suddenly, surprising them both. Luke almost dropped his glass. "What? You heard me." Elena laughed, feeling light, young, and free. "Marry me, Luke Harrison. Be my husband, my partner, my everything." He pulled her into a kiss that answered better than any words ever could. "Yes," he said when they finally pulled apart. 1,000 times yes. The following weeks were a whirlwind of planning. The wedding would be simple, right there on the ranch, under the open sky. Just family and close friends, nothing fancy, just sincere. Julia insisted on organizing everything, saying she finally had the chance to create something beautiful instead of just executing other people's plans. Ray offered to handle all the legal paperwork, joking that at least he knew how to do that well. The professor suggested they plant a special tree on their wedding day, something that would grow along with their love. "A golden oak," he said, a symbol of strength and beauty. And Marcy! Marcy became not just a lawyer, but a true friend, someone Elena trusted implicitly. On the wedding day, Elena woke up with the sunrise. She dressed alone, a simple white linen dress, wildflowers in her hair. No heavy makeup, no expensive jewelry, just herself. When she stepped out of the house, she found a path of petals leading to the ceremony site, prepared by townspeople who had insisted on helping. The music began, soft guitars playing a melody her father used to sing. Luke was waiting for her under an arch decorated with vines, wearing simple pants and a shirt, his eyes shining with emotion. Beside him was Sheriff Thompson, who had offered to officiate the ceremony. When Elena reached the makeshift altar, Luke took her hands and she saw tears streaming down his face. "You're crying," she whispered, They're happy tears, the best kind there are. The ceremony was brief but profound. They exchanged vows they had written, promises of partnership, respect, and eternal love. When the sheriff declared them husband and wife, the kiss was met with applause and cheers of joy. The party lasted until nightfall. Plenty of food, live music, and dancing under the stars. Elena saw the whole town celebrating. Not just a wedding, but everything they had achieved together. At one point, Ray approached with a small box. "I found this in the rubble of the old house," he said. "I thought you'd like to have it." Inside was her father's pipe, miraculously intact. Elena held it with reverence, feeling the weight of the memories. "Thank you," she said, her voice choking up. "Thank you for everything. It's the least I could do." When the party finally ended and the last guests had left, Elena and Luke were left alone under the starry sky. They sat in the same spot where, months ago, everything had seemed lost. "We did it," Elena said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "We really did it, and it's only the beginning." Luke pointed to the town lights in the distance. "Look at Triple Oaks. It's alive again." Elena looked, seeing not just lights but a future, children who would grow up with opportunities, families who would stay together, a community flourishing. "My father would be proud," she whispered. "He is." Luke kissed the top of her head. "Wherever he is, he is." They stayed there until dawn, watching the sun rise over the land they had saved, over the future they had built, over the love they had chosen. And when the first light of day touched the red clay, Elena knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. Not because there were no more fights ahead, but because now she had the strength to face them. Willow Creek Ranch would remain, not as a monument to the past, but as a bridge to the future. And Elena, the girl who refused to give up, who turned loss into victory and humiliation into dignity, lived to ensure that land would continue to bless generations yet unborn. If Elena's journey touched your heart, if you believe that justice and perseverance are always worth it, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We have many other stories of overcoming, of ordinary people who did extraordinary things simply by refusing to give up. Tell us in the comments, have you ever faced a situation where you had to choose between what was easy and what was right? What was your choice? Your story might inspire others. Until next time, and remember, the land has a memory, but the future is still being written.